You've probably heard the saying, you reap what you sow, 1,000 times, right? It's the simple idea about cause and effect. But what if that principle wasn't just a saying? What if it governed, well, everything, from our own lives all the way up to the fate of entire nations? Today we're diving into a really fascinating document that argues exactly that. It presents a worldview where every single action we take is like a seed being planted for the future. All right, let's get into it. So, this old proverb? It's the absolute heart of the text we're looking at. The author's whole point is that this isn't just some piece of folk wisdom. Nope. They argue it's a fundamental, governing law of the universe, one that was established by God. It's the one rule that, in their view, determines every single outcome, no exceptions. To really wrap our heads around this argument, we're going to break it down into 4 key parts. First, we'll define what the author means by the seed principle. Then, we'll see how this idea supposedly scales up from just one person to an entire country. After that, we'll look at the specific nations the author uses as case studies, the good and the bad, and finally, we'll get to the author's pretty serious warning for the whole world. Okay, let's start at the very beginning. What exactly is this seed principle? I mean, it's the foundation for this entire worldview, so we've got to understand it first. And here it is. The seed principle, according to the text, is a divine law. The idea is that every single action, and that's the seed, will inevitably produce a matching consequence, which is called its fruit. It's basically a framework of predictable results. You can only get the fruit of the seed you actually sow. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because the author doesn't just leave it as an abstract idea. They give concrete examples. So if you sow the seed of common decency and respect, you get the fruit of self-respect and confidence. You sow discipline, and you get stability. You sow law and justice, and you get a society with law and order. It's presented as this very direct, one-to-one relationship between what you do and what you get. Okay, so that's the principle on a personal level. Makes sense. But the author's argument gets a whole lot bigger. So now, let's look at how they take this idea and scale it up from a single person to the destiny of an entire nation. This slide shows the model of scale perfectly. It's like a chain reaction. See, it all starts with the individual. The combined actions of individuals define the family. Then the sum of all the families defines a society. You add up the societies and you get the country. And the state of that country today is what determines the fate of all future generations. It all just builds on itself. So here's the absolute takeaway from that section. According to this source, you just can't separate a nation's fate from the daily choices of its people. The character of a country, its destiny, its success or failure, it's all just the collective harvest from all those little individual seeds being sown day in and day out. Now, this is where the theory gets tested against reality. The author doesn't just talk in hypotheticals. They present several nations as real-world case studies to show the seed principle in action. They contrast the different kinds of seeds sown and the very, very different harvests that came from them. First on the list is Libya under Muammar Gaddafi. The author paints a really complex picture here. On the one hand, you have what they call good seeds being sown, things like reforming the country, building up agriculture, improving the education system. But on the other hand, you have what they call the worst seeds. We're talking absolute dictatorship, funding international terror, and brutally suppressing the population. So, what was the final harvest from mixing those seeds? Well, according to this text, despite some of the good things, the negative seeds ultimately won out. The fruit of it all was a failed state. The bad harvest, you could say, choked out the good. Then, the document turns its attention to Syria under the Assad regime. And here, the author points to what they see as a really clear pattern of negative seeds being planted. Things like engaging in and funding international terror, absolute one-man rule, and a total failure to plan for any kind of succession. And the resulting harvest from those seeds, as described in the text, it's direct and it's devastating. The fruit was death, destruction, poverty. And just like with Libya, the final outcome was a failed state. And this slide just lays out that contrast so clearly. On one side, you have Libya and Syria, which are presented as textbook examples of sowing chaos. And on the other side, the text points to countries like South Korea and Brazil as examples of nations that have sown seeds of industry and development, and as a result, they've reaped harvests of incredible economic prosperity. The author also applies this principle to events happening right now, making a really direct and frankly stark prediction about the Russia-Ukraine war.
The text states, "You cannot sow so much death and walk out free," and then predicts that Russia's inevitable harvest will be to fade away as a broken-up state. So in this final section, the author zooms way out. We've gone from individuals to nations, and now they're applying the seed principle on a global scale to deliver a warning for all of humankind.
To make this pivot, the author throws out a really provocative question. They ask where we all think these massive physical crises, like climate upheaval, actually come from. The text suggests the source isn't what we think it is, that it's not just a physical problem, it's a moral one. According to the document, these are the seeds being sown on a global scale. The author points to what they call unmentionable filth, and they explicitly connect these severe moral failings, like human trafficking and slavery, and even things like blasphemy in movies and the media, to what they describe as God's wrath manifesting in crises like climate upheaval. Wow. So after laying out that incredibly grim diagnosis of the world's problems, is there a way out? What is the solution that's actually offered in this text? How can humanity start sowing better seeds for a better harvest? The document proposes a very clear, three-step, and deeply theological solution. First, people need to recognize what the author calls God's protective structures. Second, they need to accept the redemption offered through His Son. And third, they need to make peace with Him directly. This is presented as the one and only way to change the global harvest. And that brings us to the end of our analysis. The source material presents this powerful, all-encompassing way of looking at the world. It's a worldview that says our future is a direct result of our present actions. And it leaves us with a final, really reflective question for all of us. If we take this metaphor seriously, if every action is a seed, what will tomorrow's harvest actually look like?